Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another one of our Facebook Live programs. We had one last month in January, and now we're wanting to just add a little bit more information as things evolve, especially, of course, with all of the issues around COVID-19 and now the vaccine rollout. There's so many things. It's a constantly evolving and changing situation, and we're doing our best to get information out to you that will be helpful in trying to either access programs or making sure that you're aware of some of the things that are occurring. We know there's lots of news channels out there for you to look at. This is just our way of trying to make sure that some of the details around, especially some of these federal program elements, are that you're aware of. So tonight we're going to talk about a few things. One is some breaking news around travel restrictions at the border. We're going to do updates as we promised a few weeks ago in our last Facebook Live. We're going to give you a little bit more details on two of the programs of the Canada Recovery Benefits, one around sickness and the other around caregiving. We're also going to an update that, again, just happened this week, some new information around those who had received the CERB payments in 2020. The government announced some changes there in terms of how that will impact you at tax time. And a new program that rolled out since our last show called the Highly Affected Sector Credit Availability Program. Now, this is mainly for businesses, but I know some of you on the call tonight will either know people in business who, look, we know businesses are really taking shellacking for the kind of restrictions and lockdowns that are in place. And this will hopefully be a way that we can, if they can access this program, will help them get to those next steps. And then finally, we're going to just really talk about a little bit more. We talked about this a little bit a few weeks ago, a little bit more detail just around what the Ontario vaccine rollout plan really looks like. And people are, not sure, when they, depending on their circumstances, when they are likely going to be able to get vaccinated. Again, there's lots of news out there about interruptions in manufacturing and shipments and all those things. So we're going to try and give you some sense of where that lands for you here in Ontario. So I'm going to just, throughout the program, you'll be able to submit your questions. And I'm just going to turn it over to Curtis to introduce how that will go and what you should do with your questions, so that at the end of the show, we'll be able to take your questions on any of the material that we've reviewed tonight.
Thank you, Bruce. Yes, as he mentioned, we're going to do the question portion, like always, at the end of the town hall. But at any point throughout the broadcast, if you do have questions related to any of the content Bruce is talking about, or any questions about any other federal issues, definitely put them in the chat. We do ask that you keep them as brief as possible. That way we are able to see the full comment. If they're too long, they get cut off, so we're not able to see the full question. So just keep them as brief as possible. And then as well, we're going to try to get to as many questions as we can, usually around 10 to 15. But if we don't get to your question, don't worry. We will follow up with you after the broadcast to get you an answer. That's pretty much it. So I'll pass it back over to Bruce.
Great. Thanks very much, Curtis. Sorry about that little cough in the midst of all that. I thought I had actually muted my microphone. So we're living in a day now where all of us are on Zoom calls and other things, and we should be really quite functional with all those things. But here I am tonight, not clicking the button at the right time. So let's get right into this then. Let's go to our first item of business. And this was really just earlier this week. Honestly, we heard that as of the 15th of February, February, people who are traveling back, this is going to be people like snowbirds. Look, not as many people did go away this winter, certainly. I mean, we know that was way down by way more than half of what usually go away. But for people coming back, not just now at airports, but also at land border crossings, they're going to have a what's called a PCR COVID test taken within 72 hours of their arrival at a land-based port of entry. So that's going to be right across the country. When you show up at a land border, if you have friends away, let them know that when they come back to Canada, they're going to have to have had this COVID test. And ideally, obviously, if it's a negative COVID test, you'll still just proceed. Provide that document, and you'll still have to do your 14-day quarantine. We're still waiting on details as to what will happen if you have a positive COVID test. That is to say, if you have COVID-19. We'll see what that looks like, but the government will be in a situation they'll likely, like we expect, much like they do at airports, they will enforce some kind of quarantine for you. And so as soon as we have details on that, we'll get that up on our website and get that information out to you as best we can. So be aware that's some new changes coming into effect on the 15th, which would be Monday. So that'll be ready to go next week. One of the other, two of the programs that we talked briefly about a few weeks ago at our last program, but I want to just delve into it a little bit more detail. There's two really key programs in the Canada Recovery Benefits. One is for illness or sickness. The other is for caregivers. So let's go to the sickness benefit first. Now, this is one that really provides around essentially $500 per week. Now, with these new programs, they withhold $50 for taxes. You have to apply each week to get it, and you will be eligible to get the Canada Recovery Sickness Benefit if you have been unable to work for more than half of your work week because you're having to self-isolate due to sickness yourself with COVID-19, or if you've been advised that you have to self-isolate, say by a physician or a nurse or health practitioner, somebody with authority, or if you have a underlying health condition that makes you susceptible to COVID and that you've been advised to stay at home, again, by a person in authority. So if you have to take 2 weeks off work because of this condition, you can apply for week by week and get the recovery sickness benefit. Now, if you the only exclusions on this wouldn't be, you can't put it on top of other COVID program benefits like the EI or CRB. So it has to be there in a situation where you're not getting other benefits, and like the other programs, you have to have had at least $5,000 of income in the past 12 months. So that's something to keep in mind for those of you who may be in those situations. There's a maximum of 2 weeks benefit under that program, and that can be any time after the 27th of September of last year, all the way through to September 25th of this year, 2021. So that's someone. Now we've got a neat little video that we'll just put up there now. It tells you, just kind of encapsulates the points that I just made.
Anita has been working in a small grocery store throughout the COVID-19 outbreak, providing an essential service to her community. After being in close contact with someone who tested positive for COVID-19, she must get tested for COVID-19 and self-isolate until she receives the results of her test. With the new Canada Recovery Sickness Benefit, Anita may be eligible to receive $500 per week for up to 2 weeks if she does not receive paid sick leave from her employer for the same period. And she will not need to have a medical certificate to get the benefit. You, like Anita, can qualify to receive the Canada Recovery Sickness Benefit if you meet the eligibility criteria. For more information, please visit canada.ca/coronavirus.
So that's the sickness benefit, and now moving on to the other one, and this is a benefit that will run much longer. It can be available for up to 26 weeks in between that period from September last of 2020, September 27th actually, all the way till the 21st of September 2021. Any 26 weeks in that period, and they don't have to be consecutive. It's the same benefit. It's $500 a week, less $50 withheld for taxes. You apply through Canada Revenue Agency. You apply on a week-by-week basis. And what this is for is, again, for caregiving, as the name suggests. If you're unable to work more than half of your work week because you're caring for a family member, there could be a situation where you have a family member under 12 years old and they're home because schools are closed, and we've been seeing there's been differences in that over this space and time, depending on when those school programs were in and out. If you're regular, let's say your daycare service that's normally available and now is shut down, so you have to stay home from work, you can then apply for the caregiving benefit to give you that little bit of extra income to make up for the time that you're off work. The other scenario is if it's a person who's under your care who is ill with COVID or even at serious risk of complication if they get sick with COVID or if they're self-isolating with COVID. So if you are providing care for someone in your home and a family member, that's a scenario that would make you eligible for this benefit. The key thing there, again, is you're not eligible if you've qualified and are receiving benefits on some of the other programs like the recovery benefit or EI or the other benefits that are available through COVID-19. Again, you've had to have at least $5,000 income in the past 12 months. So that's the caregiving benefit. Another one that can help to backstop income that's lost because you've had to miss time at work. So here's another quick little 1-minute video on the caregiving benefit.
Steve is a single father who works full-time with an 8-year-old daughter. His daughter's school had to close for 4 weeks due to a COVID-19 outbreak. Since Steve is unable to work at least 60% of his normal work schedule for those weeks to provide care for his daughter, he may be eligible to receive the Canada Recovery Caregiving Benefit. This benefit will provide $500 per week for up to 26 weeks per household. It will be available for 1 year, effective September 27, 2020. You, like Steve, can qualify to receive the Canada Recovery Caregiving Benefit if you meet the eligibility criteria. You are not eligible for benefit if schools are open. For more information, please visit canada.ca/coronavirus.
So that's the caregiving benefit. Now I'd like to move on now to some interesting news for people who received what we all fondly know now as the CERB benefit. That was the program that ran through very much from the time that the pandemic started back in March, or at least when the government started their programs, all the way through to September. And CERB was an income support benefit that many people who were usual workers on payrolls at various businesses, but also people who were self-employed, but who had lost work because of COVID-19. So the government announced that there's going to be some measures come forward here to help kind of ease the cost of that program on 2 counts. The first is that for people who received the CERB benefit, you got $500 a week through the course of those period that you applied, but no tax was withheld from those payments. So as you get closer to tax time at the end of April of this year for the 2020 calendar year, you'd end up having to pay that tax bill on the money, the CERB money that you received in 2020. What the government has done is essentially given you a 1-year holiday on paying any interest on monies that you owe because when you file your taxes, you still have to file your taxes this April. But if there's any taxes owing on your tax return, you'll have until April 2022 to April 30th, 2022 to pay those taxes from the 2020 tax year. There'll be no interest charged on that. and it essentially means you still have to pay it, obviously, but there's an interest holiday right for a full 1 year period. It'll give you a little bit more time over literally 12 months to sort of gradually chunk that down and make sure that you still pay your taxes, of course, but you have a little bit more time to pay it. It doesn't all come due for you this April. The second thing is for some of the self-employed people who were receiving the CERB benefit, there was, several hundred, I don't know what the total number was, something in the range of 30, no, it wasn't even 30,000, several thousands of CERB recipients who had gotten the self-employed benefit through CERB were notified in November and December that because when they submitted their application and you had to have no less than $5,000 of earnings in the previous year, with the way they reported their earnings, they reported it as gross earnings and not net if they're a business and self-employed. And the government said, well, you weren't eligible, and so you're going to have to pay all this back. The government has taken a second look at that and said, look, admittedly, there may have been some confusion or ambiguity around that $5,000 number. So they're essentially not going to require that any of the people who got those notices in November and December, they will not, in fact, have to pay that money back. That CERB benefit is going to stay with them, and it's not now repayable to the government. So that was an announcement the government made. Look, you're going to have a whole debate on whether that you think is the right move. People will have opinions on that, of course, but it's important to know for some of the people in our riding who may have been affected by that to know that that's just not going to happen now. And those that we understand that those who may have repaid that money that they were notified about, that money will be returned to them from the government. So I think that's all we have on that one. Now let's go to this new program that I mentioned at the top of the program called the HASCAP, which is the Highly Affected Sector Credit Availability Program. My goodness, they give us a big long title for these things, don't they? So as the name suggests, these are for the hardest hit businesses from COVID-19. And now this is not a grant. It's going to be a term loan. It's 100% guaranteed by the government, so there's no collateral requirement, and it's in situations where businesses have lost revenue in the past year due to COVID-19. So I'll get into what some of those key features are. So all of these loans, they can range from $25,000 up to as high as $1 million, up to a 10-year term loan. The first 12 months of the loan does not have to be subject to principal payment, so you just be paying the interest in that first 12 months. The interest rate is a fixed 4%, and these loans can be applied for by businesses up to June 30th of this year, June 30th, 2021. So those are some of the key elements. Now, who is going to be eligible for these? They have to be, of course, Canadian businesses. The business has to be essentially stable and viable prior to COVID-19, so pre-COVID, if you will. The business had to be more or less on its feet and functioning well. A business that has in the past year received either the wage subsidy or the rent subsidy, the two programs that we talked about in the past. And if they haven't gotten any monies from either of those two programs, the rent or wage subsidy, they can submit bank statements and financial statements to demonstrate that they've had the required loss in revenue. And speaking of that, when we think about highly affected sectors, the way that is defined for this program is that any business who has lost more than 50% of their revenue for at least 3 of the 8 months in that period. So looking back 8 months, if you had 3 of those 8 months where your revenue year over year dropped by 50%, you would be eligible to apply for this loan. And how do you do that? The way that you're going to get that application is through your own commercial bank. So you will go to your regular lender. Most will be participating in this HASCAP program. If your particular bank is not participating in it, you are eligible to apply through a bank that is providing it. So you're not confined in that sense. And you'll be able to essentially do most of this online. So this information will be coming out soon. You'll get to your local bank, find out what the details are, and this again is all guaranteed, and it's still repayable with interest, a low interest rate, but at the same time, we hope this is the kind of thing that, we've seen stories of businesses in our own area that have had very, very difficult times managing to stay afloat and be ready to provide and serve their customers when we get out of this pandemic. And this will be just a way to help them with their operational cash flow to do that. So that's a HASCAP program. I'll just check my time here and see how we're doing. Oh, good. We're just about on the time that I try to keep an eye, because we want to leave enough time for questions. We're going to get into our last big item here, and that is, again, as I said at the outset, it's one of those things that is very much in the news these days. But as we look closer at the vaccine rollout program for Ontario, it really, there's information in that plan that you don't necessarily see in some of the news reporting, and that's not a fault of journalists. They're covering the various elements of these stories, but sometimes it kind of masks what the overall plan is. So here in Ontario, we have 3 different phases of how this vaccine is going to be rolled out. Before I get into that, I wanted to just sort of pass along a comment just about the safety of the vaccine. Look, we have right now 2 vaccines that have been approved here in Canada, the Pfizer-BioNTech and the Moderna. Both of them require 2 doses. They're both manufactured in Belgium, of high quality, very effective, 94 to 95% effective with the second dose. They are safe to use, and we're certainly, all agencies are encouraging those Canadians, Ontarians who wish to get the vaccine that they should. And so we've got a really neat little message from General Rick Hillier, who is really in charge of rolling out the vaccine here in Ontario, and he's got a quick little message for us. I'd like to air that right now.
The first COVID-19 vaccines have arrived in Ontario. This is great news. These vaccines are Health Canada approved, and they are safe. Our vaccine supply will not arrive all at once, so those in vulnerable circumstances and the healthcare workers of our great province will be the first to get vaccinated. Until those vaccines are widely available, it's critical that we all continue to follow public health guidelines. Practice physical distancing. Wear a face mask. Wash your hands frequently. I encourage everyone to be patient. This is the biggest vaccination program in a century, and we expect that it will have its challenges. We are working closely with Health Canada to plan for the next deliveries of the vaccine, and we are committed to being as open as possible so the people of Ontario can follow along on the journey and know what to expect at each step. This has been a very difficult period for all of us, but there is a light at the end of the tunnel. Please stay the course with us. Together we will beat COVID-19.
So as you can imagine, and as General Hillier alluded to, I mean, there's bound to be some hiccups along the way here, and we've seen some in the news about some of the interruptions in shipments, for example, even just this last 2 weeks. And I know officials are eager to get that back on track, and it seems that it is starting to. So I mentioned there's going to be 3 phases. So phase 1 is this. Phase 1 is for the high-risk population. That's going to, right from the start of when vaccines arrived in December, and that's going to run run through till the end of next month. So right through essentially to the end of March. That's going to involve about 1.1 million Ontarians. And so those are the people high risk. So it's residents and staff and essential caregivers in long-term care facilities and hospitals. It's going to be people who are healthcare workers, hospital employees, staff who work or study in hospitals, all the people who are really exposed to COVID and a particularly high risk of being infected by it. Adults in First Nations and Inuit populations where they're in a lot of cases on reserve and in these kind of communal type settings that makes it extremely more likely for something for infection of COVID-19, and then adults in chronic home health care. So that's the high risk population, and you've seen here in Simcoe County, for example, that we've seen news reports of the mobile units getting out to various long-term care centers. I've seen even our good friend Shona Lustra and her organization, some great Facebook posts about her work and getting out and helping to immunize people who are at high risk in our community. And we just owe them the world to the work that they're doing in that area. The government of Ontario in this phase one had set February the 15th, next week, as the deadline for all long-term care center residents and staff to be immunized. I just heard this morning that they're on track to see that happen. So this is really good. The final point on phase one is that this is the access points for vaccine is mostly under the control of the healthcare sector. So it's going to be public health units, hospitals, and specific locations where they'll be distributing this from. But it's very much within the realm of the healthcare service sector that's going to manage the vaccine rollout. That will change as we get into phase two. So let's go have a look at what phase two tells us. And I'm glad David has this. David, just go back one slide there. Okay, there it is. Yeah, so no, the one with the little airplane on it. There we are. So at the top of that slide that you'll see the phase one and phase two. So phase one, you can see, goes past March and into April. Phase two starts in April, and it's going to go all the way into July. Now, this is going to be a much different kind of vaccine program. Mass deliveries of vaccine, 5 million doses a month through most of it, from starting in April right through until July, and then probably more. The objective here is 8.5 million Ontarians in that period of time, from March all the way through to July. And this is where we then start to get into more of the general population. So this will include, for example, older adults across the province, starting with those that are 80 years and older. And then as the over 80-year-olds become immunized, they'll start on the next group from the 75 and up, and then the 70 and up, and then the 65 and up, and so on. So gradually through that period, anybody that age who wishes to will be able to get vaccinated. It'll include people who work in high-risk, again, communal settings like shelters, community living, group homes, prisons, those kinds of things where they're a higher risk of infection. Frontline essential workers and first responders, teachers, education staff, people in food processing, again, those key areas that need to have a higher priority for immunization. And then on the rollout side, and now instead of just access points that are within the realm of the healthcare sector, you're going to see vaccination access at municipally run community centers, mobile vaccination units, pharmacies, clinics, primary care settings. So more and more spaces, and this is where the team, I'll mention at the end how this is actually going to go, but there's a coordination with making sure that when we get to phase two, there'll be points in our community where you can go, and if you meet the criteria, you just go and you get your first vaccine, and then they'll get you scheduled for your second one. And then after July, we go to everyone else. This is phase 3, and that's the remaining population. Again, massive numbers, but through the months of August and September, anybody who wishes to get vaccinated will be able to. And the same thing, they will be going out to these community access points to be immunized. The government at this point, I know some have speculated that in many ways this, there could be a real holdup on these vaccinations. There's some unknowns, and sure enough, there are some unknowns. We're expecting more vaccines to be approved by Health Canada, so there'll be more and more available. The provinces themselves and Health Canada has indicated that there'll be much bigger quantities of vaccines coming as we get into April. So that's all on tap, and we'll have to watch very carefully how this goes, but the government stands by its commitment to have anybody who wishes to be vaccinated will have the opportunity to do so by the end of September. So that's the kind of track that we're on. But there's a big chunk of our population here in Simcoe North that is going to be covered by that phase 2. By the time we get into July, a good many of our people in their elder years, over, say, 65 years old, and I'm not trying to brandish or generalize about anybody's age at this. Heavens, I'm 63, so I'm not considered a senior just yet, but in some areas I am. So who knows? I do have the gray hair to make up for that. But let's just say now I mentioned earlier, how is it going to be managed here? The Simcoe County, the Simcoe Muskoka District Health Unit has what's called a vaccination campaign advisory committee. That was struck in January, and they are going to manage all of the logistics around how the vaccine will be available here in Simcoe County and in Muskoka. So they're on top of that, and we just want to finish with a little bit of some resources, some places where you can go to get information on this. And thanks, David, who put that slide up there. That's the much of the information I've been mentioning here comes from the Getting a COVID Vaccine in Ontario website. Very, very good, and everything's explained in there quite well. The Simcoe Muskoka District Health Unit also has a section on vaccine and immunization. Not as much detail in terms of the phasing of that, but they will be taking their direction from the Ontario health authorities as to how that will roll. And as we get into the general call for vaccination, sort of from April onward, as we learn more information, we'll have that up on our website as well. So with that, and I think we're pretty close to our 30 minutes there. We now have a chance for some questions, and as I've been watching here on my screen, we have been getting some questions up, and I'll go to the first ones. And Curtis, I'll just ask Curtis then if the questions are all up that you'd like to get into the mix here at this point.
Yes.
Okay, very good. That was short and sweet. Okay, so let's go. Our first one, we have a question. This is from Barb, and she's asking what my take is on the speculation of a federal election being called in June. How do we think Elections Canada will handle that during COVID? And do I feel it's a good time in giving the state of the economy? Well, thanks, Barb. That's a good question. And let me just say that election speculation is always the favorite thing to do in Ottawa. You'll see, and anybody who reports on national politics, it's just so hard to tell. This is one of these things that is very much the prerogative of the Prime Minister. We are, as you all know, we're in a minority parliament. So if all of the opposition parties choose to defeat the government, they can. Like, we'll see a budget probably in March, and if there's things in the budget that all the opposition parties find disagreeable, they can vote in a way to essentially oppose the government. It's a motion of confidence, and if the government loses a vote on their budget, the tradition is that the Prime Minister would go to the Governor General and seek dissolution of Parliament, and we'd be into an election. Personally, it's my opinion only here, I don't think that we will see an election this spring. I could obviously be wrong. That could happen. I think when we're in the midst of pandemic and Canadians are still getting vaccinated, I think we'll see our case numbers go down in the spring, but the risks around this pandemic will still be there. I'm sure that the government is going to want to run on its record of how it's managed this pandemic, and that'll be up to voters to decide what they think about that. Will Elections Canada handle it well? Yes, they will. They will do what is necessary. They're a professional organization. They run elections very well. And if Barb is who I think she is, I think she knows well that it's a really, really good system of how to make sure that everyone who wishes to vote can. And so I have great confidence in Elections Canada to manage this, even if we are in a pandemic. But I'm not a betting person, but I would say the more likely window for an election in 2021 would be the fall. So, and do I think it's good timing? No, I don't. I think if people are bucking for an election this spring, politicians are doing that, I think they don't really have a close ear to what's really going on in this country, and they should just put off election and politics until we get our economy going again and get people healthy and safe and back to their livelihoods. All right, let's go next to Kelly. Can I comment on the reasoning behind Mr. O'Toole's cabinet shuffle? Why did he move Pierre Poilievre? Well, Kelly, that's a very good question. I can't profess to know the leaders, that's Aaron O'Toole's reasoning on this. He has obviously one important task at hand, and that is to unite his caucus and his party behind an election bid some point down the road, whenever that happens. And he has to present our party as one that will attract more and more voters. We got just over 31% in the last election. In order to form a government in Canada, we need to be certainly in the high 30s, mid to high 30s, and if you want a majority government, it's going to have to be more like 40%. So that means the Conservative Party, that currently has about 120 seats, probably has to win another 45 to 55 seats to really get a good, stable government situation, either a strong minority or a majority government. So that's a lot of seats, and the leader knows that. So he's going to be looking at the kind of things, the shuffling of cabinet are things that will find a way to present the party in a way that will attract more and more interest. And really be, as the leader has said in many of his remarks, he sees the Conservative Party as a government in waiting. And so it has to show that competence, that maturity, the sensibility around the kind of government that people who may not have voted Conservative recently will look at this party as one that could be a good alternative to the governing Liberals. So that's my opinion on that. Tracy, so if you received CRB, could you still qualify for HASCAP? So HASCAP is more of a business. It's really for businesses. HASCAP is a loan program. Normally it would be a business entity that would be doing that. So if you are self-employed, you would need to have some. Will have shown that you've had some payroll deductions or been part of those programs. I'm going to maybe just check with Curtis on that to see if we've seen so far. And I should say on this, HASCAP is new to us. Curtis, have you seen anything on this so far that would suggest that, having been a CRB benefit, that's the Canada Recovery Benefit, would it disqualify you from applying for HASCAP?
Not necessarily. There's the potential that you might be able to apply for both if you meet the eligibility criteria for both. So in the event that you are self-employed, if you can show that revenue drop, likely then you would be able to access the HASCAP. It is more of a loan program, whereas the CRB is an income replacement. So you as an employee of your self-employment could likely get some money through the CRB and then also take advantage of some of the other business support measures in place.
Great. So I hope that answers your question. So there are two separate programs. CRB is kind of an income support program for self-employed and for workers. HASCAP is really for the business entity for operational cash flow. So, but by all, check in with us as we get more information on HASCAP. Talk to your bank as well, and they will have more specific details on what things in there might make you ineligible for that. But it seems like a pretty open program, and if you meet the criteria as Curtis described, you are one of those businesses that's been highly affected and should be eligible for this. Barb asks, why can we not get information about the vaccine contracts and why are we surviving? Boy, again, you guys are coming up with some great questions. The contracts, we don't know. I mean, this is up to the government. They should be releasing that information. There's many other countries that have been quite open about this thing. They hide behind the notion that because they are commercial contracts, it allows them to keep them private. I mean, that's the sort of the technical answer to that question. But honestly, for a government, in my opinion, who really committed itself to more open and transparent government, it seems like they could be far more forthcoming on that. And we are behind the rest of the world on the vaccination program. We're not doing as well. There are probably a good measure of the European countries that are doing better on this in terms of the percentage of Canadians, the percentage on a per capita basis that have been vaccinated. In the United States, you can see they're up to around 15%. The United Kingdom is over 20% have been vaccinated, and we're sitting right now at just shy of 3%. So we know we're not getting as many shipments of vaccine coming in, partly because we don't have our own production here, but a host of other reasons that really has left us beholden to production and pharmaceutical companies that are producing in other parts of the world. So this is something that we're going to have to really take a look at for future purposes to make sure we have our own production here. Neil, I'm a professional drummer, educated in the entertainment industry, completely halted, and our income stopped. We rely on CRB. Will the CRB be extended as it may run out in March? So the CRB, like some of the other programs under it, there's a maximum there of 26 weeks. So if you started CRB last fall, as Neil may have in this case, it's only going to go through until March. Will it be extended? Really hard to tell. As we get closer, we have seen, Neil, where the government has shifted depending on what the circumstances are. So if we're still, for example, in serious lockdown like we are now, you may see some latitude to improve or change and modify on the fly the way they have. You saw what we did as I spoke tonight about what they did with the CERB payments. So they're finding ways to make sure that there isn't going to be any undue additional burden on Canadians as they're still trying to get their livelihoods back on track. For all intents and purposes, the government is trying to live by its commitment to Canadians to say, we've got your backs here. We're going to try and get you through. Yes, this is costly. There's no doubt we are borrowing lots of money to get us through this. It's why the vaccine program becomes so important, because that's going to be the key to getting businesses reopened and livelihoods back. So, Neil, hang in there and certainly check in with us from time to time as you get closer to that date. We'd be happy to take some additional questions forward for you. Shona, let's see what she has to say here. I've had in my vaccination chair in the last 2 weeks. Shona's been out there doing wonderful work in our community. To know how public health will transfer the information so that they'll be able to freely cross the border when borders open. I know there's talk of a medical passport. Will vaccinations be linked to their passport or health card? That's something, Shona, we're not 100% sure on. We haven't seen what the designs are on this just yet. I honestly think there would be huge pushback to the notion of having a vaccination passport. I think here in Ontario, your vaccinations are linked to your health records through your own private health number, and so that's what we've evolved to here in Ontario. And so there may be a scenario where your health card really becomes your passport, and so then you can decide as a consumer whether you're going to, provide that health card for that particular reason. The border opening is still going to be a ways off, folks. I think that we're not going to see the Canada-U.S. border open up until well into when the United States case numbers, and they are starting to come down. It's far worse case counts than we've had here in Canada, and far more deaths, but they are starting to turn the corner there. But I wouldn't expect that we're going to be going into the U.S. Anytime soon, and when we do, the decision will be taken on the basis of far less risk to COVID-19 generally. I think we've learned in all of this that part of the way that we keep our country safe is to keep a tight control on the border, and that's one of the items we talked about tonight. The necessity of having to show a COVID test when you come into the country, even if you're a returning Canadian. So these are some of the things that we're going to have to keep an eye on. But again, that'll be something we'll see as we get further into general vaccination, what kind of, whether it's businesses or airlines or transportation companies, I don't think we're going to see the full weight of the state coming down on people to say you can't do this unless you've got a vaccination passport. I hope we don't get to that. Diane asks, if there's an emergency in the family, like death or illness, would you be able to drive across the border without being vaccinated? So it's not the vaccination, Diane, really isn't the key there. It's really the negative COVID test. So you can go into the United States now, even for non-essential travel. If you have to go stateside to a family member, you can go there. There's still the United States, since President Biden was elected, the Biden administration has put some additional restrictions in place. The same thing as we have, the 14-day quarantine when you get into the States. So you won't be able to come home for 2 weeks, but you can go there, and there's no issues that way. So because vaccines aren't generally available to people, that's not going to be a requirement. But you may have to be, when you come back to Canada, for example, you would be subject to the COVID test when you return. And if you fly back into Canada, a returning Canadian can do that, but you are going to be subject to that quarantine requirement when you fly in now, where you've got to go and stay in a hotel at your own expense for 3 days. And you have to have a pre-flight COVID test and a COVID test when you land. So it's very rigorous, and I would say that if it can be avoided, better. But honestly, if these are urgent situations, you do what you have to do, and you will be able to go. Jay is asking, who is Canada borrowing the money from? Boy, you're really good questions here tonight. So the way this works, this is all through the Bank of Canada. When the government requires additional monies, it effectively works through the Bank of Canada, issues bonds, and eventually borrows. So it creates essentially an indebtedness that rolls up in our national debt. The Bank of Canada literally, in some cases, prints money. They've been purchasing assets. They've been doing different transactions that help provide liquidity. And I'm not an economist here, but essentially the Bank of Canada provides a means by which the government can borrow money at very, very low interest rates to give it the cash flow that it needs to support these programs. There still is a cost, though. I mean, at the end of the the day, we as taxpayers all have to pay that back. We have to be in a position to pay not only the interest costs, the debt servicing costs for that, but all of that principal payment, which has gradually added on top of the national debt that we had going into COVID-19. That's going to be a debt burden that all of us are going to have to carry in the years ahead. So much of the, I think, as we get into this next election and we're getting more into post-pandemic, there'll be a good discussion on how we as a society, as a country, are going to come to deal with that debt going forward, because we're going to have to pay it off just like you have to when you borrow to buy a home. You have a mortgage and you have to spread that mortgage cost out in a way that makes you able to afford the things that you need to do, and at the same time gradually year over year pay that down. We have to do the very same thing as a country. So I think that's our last question, and we're a little bit over time, Curtis. So let's go to our little wrap up here. And I wanted to just update you just on a few things. We want to just remember that our offices are here to serve you. We are all working from home these days. The offices are not open unless we have to come in to do a completely safe curbside service for exchange of documents or that sort of thing. But we're here to serve you. You can reach us by phone or email, and we're on the job each and every day. Doing that, we'll probably stay in that mode. We will stay in that mode until the restrictions lift. I would say at a minimum, the red zone and others as once we get back into that color program. Yeah, all our contact information is there. Email is the best thing to reach us at, and we're on top of it. If you leave a message at our regular phone numbers at either constituency office in Midland or Orillia, someone will get back to you right away. We'd like to thank our crew here for tonight, Curtis Schluter and David Dalrymple. These two guys helped me produce this show. I don't produce it, David does, and Curtis and I add our elements into this thing and do the script and some of the pieces that we pulled together for tonight's show. I want to certainly not sign off without thanking, I mentioned it earlier, our frontline healthcare workers who have been out just doing incredibly good work and shouldering a terrific burden in terms of keeping our community safe and helping people when they're ill. And they're just doing a wonderful, wonderful job for us. Can't thank them enough. I should add to that, I mean, it's also essential workers, people that are keeping the supplies coming in and in delivery trucks, and our first responders and police, and our community is really showing we have much to be proud of, the people in our community that are working for us to get through this terrible time. Our next Facebook Live is going to be on the 29th of March. That's a Monday evening, and the topic is going to be about the SS Keewatin. So this is a story that's starting to brew in our community, has been for some time, a very unique and special historical artifact cherished by the people in the township of Tay and the village of Port McNicoll, a key part of our history here in southern Georgian Bay. And there's some risks around the SS Keewatin, weighing anchor and heading to a different part of the Great Lakes, and we sure don't want that to happen. But we want to get you some information around what's happening with that story. So our next town hall is going to be about that, and we're going to have some guests here from the Friends of the Keewatin and the person who is running the campaign that's called Keep Keewatin Home. So we're going to talk to you about that. As we get into the later spring, we'll be back and I should say, we'll add other programs if urgent information becomes available. Keep an eye on your Facebook page, and we'll be there to help you out as best we can. So I want to wish everyone a wonderful evening. Thank you all for taking the time to come and join me this evening. Thank you to the questioners for your articulate and thoughtful questions. And we'll sign off, and we'll see you next time here on Facebook Live.